She was never supposed to be there that night. A woman in a faded blue wool coat, standing under the golden light of a restaurant meant for people who had never worried about rent or the smell of thrifted fabric. Inside, laughter sparkled like glass. But when she walked in, the room changed. Someone whispered, someone snickered. They thought she was a joke. Only one man, Silver at the temples, calm as winter light, stood up and asked the room to be quiet. What happened after that silence would change both of their lives and a city that had forgotten how to listen. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe now. Let's begin. The wind off the harbor carried the smell of salt and exhaust, the kind that nipped through cloth and found the skin beneath. Nora Bennett tightened her faded blue wool coat around her shoulders and hurried along Boylston Street, her boots clicking over wet concrete. Boston was glowing for the holidays, trees wrapped in gold lights, shop windows dressed like promises she could no longer afford to keep. She checked her phone again. "Be brave tonight," one message said, followed by a winking emoji. "Don't chicken out," said another. They'd meant it as encouragement, she told herself. Friends from her old teaching job, women who still met for brunches she couldn't join anymore. When they'd invited her to this blind date, they'd sounded almost kind. "You've been alone too long. Nora, you need to get out there." The restaurant's sign shimmered ahead. Amelia's all white marble and soft light spilling onto the sidewalk. Through the glass, she saw linen tablecloths and champagne flutes catching the glow. Her reflection in the door was a ghost among them 40-ish. Wind flushed, hair gathered in a practical bun, blue coat dulled from years of wear. The doorman's polite smile faltered when she stepped inside. "Good evening," he said, glancing down at her boots before recovering. "Reservation name?" Mason," she replied, the name she'd been given for a blind date. He nodded and gestured toward the hostess stand. The woman there, young and severe in black, lifted her brows as Nora approached. "Reservation for 2 under Mason." Nora repeated, trying to sound confident. The hostess scrolled her tablet, lips pressed in a line that wasn't quite a smile. Yes. Your party hasn't arrived yet. You can wait at the table." Nora followed her through a corridor lined with mirrors and wine racks. The air smelled of butter and truffle oil. Diners murmured over candlelight. She could feel eyes flick toward her coat, then away. It wasn't cruel, just the small, assessing glance of people who noticed difference. Her table sat near a window overlooking the street. A single candle burned there. The hostess placed a menu before her and retreated without asking for her coat. Nora sat, pretending to study the list of entrees she couldn't pronounce. Her fingers were stiff from the cold. She rubbed them together, waiting. Minutes passed. At the next table, 2 women in sleek dresses whispered behind their hands. Nora caught a fragment she came alone and felt her stomach tighten. She straightened, determined to look unconcerned. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from her old colleague. "Sandra. Is he there yet? Tell us everything later," Nora typed back. "Not yet," and hesitated before adding, "I think I'll give him 10 more minutes." She deleted that part and sent only the first line. 10 minutes became 15. The server approached, polite but impatient. "Would you like something to drink while you wait? Maybe just water?" He nodded, then returned a moment later with a tall glass sweating onto a napkin. As he placed it down, his eyes flicked toward the bar, where a small cluster of young men laughed too loudly. Nora followed his glance and froze. One of them, dark hair, neat suit, was holding up his phone, showing something to the others. On the screen, she glimpsed a chat thread with her own photo, lifted from social media. Her breath hitched, blue coat, corner table. Laughter broke across the bar like glass shattering. Her throat went dry. She stared down at her hands, the fine lines at the base of her fingers catching the candlelight. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe. The server returned, setting a flute of pale wine on the table. "Compliments of the gentleman at the bar," he said with a quick smile that didn't reach his eyes. She looked over. The men raised their glasses in mock salute. One mimed checking a watch, another mouthed something she couldn't hear it, but she read the shape of the word late. Her pulse thudded in her ears. The server lingered. Your date might be running behind. Would you like to order an appetizer? No, she whispered. No, thank you. He moved on. Nora stared at the bubbles rising through the wine, a thin gold rope climbing toward the surface. The room was too bright now, too loud. Every laugh, every clink of cutlery landed like static against her skin. She thought about leaving standing, walking out, letting the cold night swallow her. But she imagined the laughter following her through the door, the texts that would come later. How did it go? Did he show a flicker of movement in the window drew her eyes? Outside, headlights glided past, and for an instant she saw herself reflected in the glass. The blue coat, the lone candle, the untouched drink. She hardly recognized the woman sitting there. She took a breath, slow and deliberate, the way she used to teach her art students before presentations. You belong wherever you decide to be. That was what she'd told them. When the server passed again, she said quietly, "Could I just have the check?" He hesitated. For the drink, yes. He nodded and disappeared toward the register. The laughter from the bar rose again, then cut off suddenly as a deep voice spoke firm, low, carrying through the room. Nora turned slightly, but the words were swallowed by distance and the swell of background music. The men at the bar shifted, some standing straighter, others suddenly quiet. The server returned with her check and an extra glass. "I'm sorry," he said under his breath. "I didn't mean to upset you. Someone asked me to bring this over." She frowned. "Who?" He gestured toward a table in the corner. A man sat there alone, dark coat over the chair beside him, eyes steady, expression unreadable. When their gazes met, he inclined his head slightly, almost formal. Nora looked back at the untouched Prosecco before her, then at him again. The candle between them flickered, its flame bending toward the open door where the wind slipped in from the harbor. Something in that gesture, his calm, the quiet challenge of it, made the laughter at the bar fade to a dull hum in her mind. She hesitated, unsure whether to acknowledge him or gather her things and run. But before she could decide, he rose from his seat and began walking toward her table. The room seemed to hold its breath. He stopped 3 steps from her table, close enough that she could see the gray threaded through his hair and the crease at the corner of each eye, the kind you earn from squinting into weather or laughing when no one expected you to. He didn't touch the empty chair. He didn't lean. He simply asked, voice even, "Miss, would you allow me to keep you company so no one mistakes silence for consent to their rudeness?" Nora blinked. The candle wavered and steadied again. At the bar, a tight cough, a snort disguised as a throat clear. She could feel heat rise along her neck, that old instinct to apologize just for existing where someone thought she shouldn't. I was just leaving," she said, half rising. "If you'd like to," he answered, not moving. "But if you're leaving because they made it smaller to be here, I'd be honored to help correct the scale." It would have been easier if he'd smiled with pity, if he'd used that sugary tone people reserve for messes they want to step around. He didn't. His face was untroubled by performance, his gaze precise, as if he were laying a level across a crooked shelf. Behind him, the hostess hovered, uncertain. The server watched from the aisle with the rigid stillness of someone who knew the difference between a problem and a moment that might heal one. "What's your name?" Nora asked, surprised at the steadiness of her own voice. Cole Harrington. The name ticked somewhere in her memory headlines. A ribbon cutting on the evening news. A company that built plazas and transit corridors and places with fountains where people took wedding photos. The recognition passed across her face a beat late. And because it did, she saw something almost like regret flicker in his eyes. He lifted a hand, small, apologetic. "I'm here to eat dinner, not to be a headline. May I sit?" She glanced toward the bar. A young man, too pleased with himself, lifted his glass as if toasting a private joke. The old ache rose again, being turned into a story that wasn't hers. Nora exhaled slowly. "Yes," she said. "Please." Cole drew out the chair with no scrape against the floor, as though the room might startle. He sat, folded his coat neatly over the back, and nodded to the server. "We'll take a moment. Thank you." "Of course," the server said, relief quiet as a blessing. For a while, neither of them spoke. A sous chef called an order in the distance. A spoon chimed against porcelain. Somewhere. A laugh tried to gather speed and failed. Cole looked at the untouched flute of Prosecco. Was that theirs? His chin tipped toward the bar? "I think so." "May I ask you not to drink it?" His tone was gentle, not controlling. "Let it sit there. Sometimes the most eloquent answer is something that doesn't move." Nora felt a smile threaten, small and private. "You talk like a lawyer. I talk like a man who has learned to count to 10 before making things worse." He set his menu down. "A friend once told me dignity is mostly posture and breath. The posture we can fix. The breathing takes practice." Her shoulders loosened a fraction. "And what about the rest of the room?" The room forgot itself. He paused, then added, "Rooms can be reminded." He lifted a hand to the server, who approached with the caution of someone tiptoeing past a sleeping dog. Cole's voice stayed low. "I'd like to say something, if that's all right. No names, just context." The server studied his face, then glanced to Nora, asking without words. She nodded. The server looked toward the hostess. She gave the faintest shrug. The dining room had shifted into that particular hushed curiosity masquerading as patience. Cole stood. He didn't clink a glass. He didn't raise his voice. He let the room come to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, as if he were asking the time, "I won't keep you. A guest here tonight was offered unkind attention she didn't ask for. That happens in cities. It happens in nice rooms, too. I don't think that's who we want to be." He rested one hand lightly on the back of Nora's chair, not claiming it, anchoring himself instead. Kindness is the dress code tonight. It wasn't a grand speech. It didn't try to be wise. It landed because it refused to be dramatic. The words moved out through the candles and the flatware, and the whispering glass like heat through winter air more felt than seen. A woman at a corner table glanced down, embarrassed by nothing anyone could name. The hostess's shoulders lowered, as though a weight had rolled off the spine. At the bar, the young men lifted their hands in surrender, sheepish, one of them mouthing sorry with a shrug that made him look suddenly 10 years younger. There was a beat of clean, clear space that felt like a held chord resolving, and the hum of the restaurant resumed at a different pitch, one step kinder. Cole sat again. He said nothing. He didn't look for Nora's approval. The server returned, a new glass in hand. "From the manager," he said, setting it between them. "On the house. Plain water, slices of lemon drifting like pale moons." "Thank you," Nora murmured. Cole waited until the server had gone. "If you'd prefer to eat alone, I'll return to my table." "Stay," she said, surprised by how quickly the word arrived. He nodded, as if the decision made a quiet sense the room would understand later. "Then we'll start simple." He flipped the menu, a bowl of soup first, the kind that warms the hands before the mouth. "Lobster bisque," she asked, remembering the scent. "That will do nicely," they ordered. The server left in a looser gait than before, as though his shoes weighed less. Nora smoothed the napkin across her lap. The tremble in her fingers had mostly gone. She became aware of the ordinary music of the place, again the clatter from the kitchen, the wind fretting at the windows, the soft run of conversation in a dozen keys. It felt like coming back into a room where, 5 minutes ago, she had not been welcome. "Thank you," she said finally, keeping her eyes on the water's surface. "You didn't have to make a scene. I tried not to," he answered. "I've learned scenes like to make themselves if you let them. And if I'd said no, I would have stood, wished you a good evening, and paid your check on the way out." He hesitated. "I don't enjoy stepping into other people's moments, but I dislike worse the part of me that used to keep walking." Nora looked up. Used to before, he said, and left the word to decide its shape later. Their bisque arrived in shallow white bowls, steam rising in ribbons. The first spoonful worked its warmth through her, slow as mercy. Around them, nothing dramatic happened, no apologies delivered to the table, no manager hovering, just the very ordinary miracle of an expensive restaurant learning how to look itself in the eye. At the bar, one of the young men edged by, angling toward the door. He paused. "Ma'am," he said, not quite meeting her gaze. "I'm, sorry about earlier." Nora considered the contrition for what it was: not a performance, not enough. But something. "Thank you," she said. The door opened, cold air slipped in, the man was gone. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Across from her, Cole folded his spoon on the saucer. "Better? Better," she said. "Good." He nodded once, satisfied, not triumphant. "Then maybe we can have dinner." She almost laughed. The normalcy of it felt like a hand offered to someone who'd slipped on ice, no fuss. Just lift and steady. They ate in small, companionable silences, the kind that grant a person back to herself. For the first time all evening, Nora noticed the pearly shine of the tablecloth, the way the candle's flame put a tiny gold ring in the silverware, the sound of someone at the far end of the room telling a story with his hands. She glanced at the untouched Prosecco still standing beside the water. Bubbles rose and burst without leaving a trace. She realized she didn't mind its presence anymore. It could sit there as a footnote to a chapter she hadn't chosen, eclipsed by the one she would. Cole followed her gaze. "Leave it," he said quietly. "I will." Outside, the harbor wind pressed its palm against the glass, testing the seal. Inside, heat hummed softly through the vents. Somewhere between those two currents, something in her steadied, then lifted, as if a line had been untied. "Tell me," Cole said, resting his forearms lightly on the table, "what you were reading before your phone lit up." She looked at him, surprised again. "How did you know I was reading?" "You had the look," he said, a half smile, like someone building a small fire in a cold room. Nora felt the smile reach her eyes, tentative and real. She opened her mouth to answer, and then, from the entry, the doorman's voice carried, "Good evening, Mr. Harrington." Heads turned. The name ran through the room like a low chord struck on a piano. Nora's next breath paused between winter and warmth, between what she thought this was and whatever it might be now. The bisque had cooled enough to sip without burning, its scent rich with butter and a trace of sherry. Nora stirred it once, watching the steam curl and vanish like smoke from a candle just snuffed. Across from her, Cole broke a piece of bread with careful hands and passed her half. "Bread tastes better when it's shared," he said simply. She smiled, faintly, cautious. That sounds like something a preacher would say, or someone who's eaten too many dinners alone. The honesty in his tone surprised her. It wasn't confessional, just factual, the way you'd note the weather. She took the bread, its crust crisp and warm. The first bite was unexpectedly good, simple, grounding. For a while they ate in companionable quiet. The room had settled back into its rhythm. A jazz trio near the bar played something low and steady, notes like the pulse of an old heart still working fine. Cole glanced toward the window. "Do you always wear that coat?" Nora laughed before she could stop herself. "What a question. I didn't mean I know." She looked down at the coat draped over her chair. The fabric was thinning at the elbows, one pocket stitched with thread that didn't quite match. "Yes. It's been with me for years. I found it in a consignment shop after my father passed. He used to call this shade lake blue. It was our fishing color. You know, the color just before the sun rises, when the water looks like it's waiting for something." Cole studied her, the small furrow between his brows deepening. "It suits you? Not the color well?" "Yes, the color too, but the idea of it." "What idea?" "That kind of waiting." She blinked, uncertain how to answer. It wasn't flirtation, it was observation, delivered gently, almost clinically. She set her spoon down. I was a teacher once, she said, to change the subject. Art and community projects, mostly at Jefferson Elementary. He nodded. That's in South Boston, isn't it? Yes. I ran an after-school art room old cafeteria space we turned into a workshop. Kids from the neighborhood came by, drew, built things, sometimes just talked. It was messy and loud and wonderful. Her voice softened. They shut it down last spring. Budget review. The principal called it a reallocation of resources. Cole looked down at his bowl, the spoon idle in his hand. I've heard that phrase before, he murmured. They told me I could stay on as a substitute. Nora tried to laugh, but the sound caught halfway. I thought I'd keep it going in a smaller way. But you can't run a community out of a broom closet. The air between them shifted, quiet but dense. Cole rested his elbows on the table. Fingers linked. That must have been hard. It wasn't about me, she said quickly. It was about the kids. Some of them needed that space more than I ever will. I didn't ask if it was fair, he said gently. I said it must have been hard. Her eyes met his. Yes, it was. For a long beat they sat in the calm that comes after truth is spoken aloud. The jazz faded into applause somewhere behind them. A waiter refilled their water, the lemon slices drifting like lazy fish. Cole broke the silence first. My father used to say there are two kinds of losses, the kind that ends something, and the kind that redefines it. The trick is knowing which you're dealing with. Which one do you think that was for me? He smiled faintly. You tell me. Nora leaned back, considering. I think it ended a version of me that thought effort guaranteed permanence. I used to believe if you built something with enough love, it would last. And now I believe nothing's safe from a line item in a spreadsheet. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he folded his napkin, aligning the edges with absent precision. There was a quiet click in his jaw, as though a thought had locked into place and he wasn't sure whether to speak it. I know that district, he said finally. Jefferson Elementary, the expansion they did 3 years ago. Nora nodded. They added a new modular wing for administration, supposed to save energy costs. Cole's eyes dropped to the table. My company supplied those units. Her pulse stuttered. Harrington Urban Works. Yes. A dull hum filled her ears, the kind that comes before anger or heartbreak. She couldn't tell which. So you helped them build the offices they used to justify cutting my program. His gaze met hers, steady but heavy. I didn't know it was tied to that. We just signed the contract. The city wanted efficiency upgrades. I should have asked what they'd be replacing. The room seemed to tilt a little. Nora wasn't sure what to do with the irony sitting between them, like another plate on the table. That's life, isn't it? We all replace something, I suppose. His voice was low, and we rarely ask who pays the difference. The music picked up again, a saxophone line tracing the edge of melancholy. Outside, snow had begun to fall small, hesitant flakes skimming across the glass. Cole reached for his water, but didn't drink. When they built that wing, they asked for a mural, something generic for the lobby. I turned it down. Said I didn't want to decorate bureaucracy. Nora huffed a small laugh. Practical and poetic. That's rare. He shrugged. I like things that last. Steel, concrete, systems that hold weight. He paused. But I forget sometimes that people do too. She studied him more closely then. The crease at his temple. The hands too steady for a man who hadn't practiced restraint all his life. You talk like someone who's used to fixing things with blueprints. Maybe. He glanced up. And you talk like someone who knows when color can do more than numbers. The line should have felt rehearsed. It didn't. It landed softly, an even exchange between two people who'd lost their ground in different ways. The server brought fresh bread without being asked. They tore it in silence, butter melting as fast as they spread it. Nora felt something uncoil in her chest. The humiliation from earlier had drained away, replaced by an odd lightness. She wasn't sure what to call it: relief, maybe, or the rare ease of being seen without judgment. Cole set down his knife. His eyes were distant, voice quieter. I can't fix what happened at that school, but I can tell you something no one ever told me when I lost my father to the same kind of math. What's that? He looked straight at her. I'm sorry for what you were made to carry. The words came without pity, so plain and solid they settled in her like a steadying hand. She hadn't realized until that moment how starved she was for acknowledgement that didn't try to tidy the wound. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The snow outside thickened, catching the city light until the world beyond the glass blurred into white. When she finally found her voice, it came soft as breath. You don't even know me. Maybe not, he said, but I recognize the shape of something I helped break. The wind rattled the window pane once, then quieted again. Nora looked down at her empty bowl, the thin film of pink-orange broth clinging to the rim. You're not what I expected tonight, neither are you, he said. I think that's the point. The candles flickered as someone opened the restaurant door, letting in a gust of winter air and the faint sound of car tires hissing on wet pavement. Nora lifted her gaze, and for the first time all evening, she didn't feel the urge to leave. The plates had been cleared, leaving only the faint ring of condensation from their glasses. Outside, snow leaned sideways across the street lamps, caught in the wind like threads of silk. Nora traced a finger along the rim of her water glass. Hesitant. You asked what I was reading earlier. She said, It wasn't a book, really. I was sketching. Cole's brows lifted slightly. Sketching? She nodded. I still carry a notebook. Old habit from the art room. I draw things I can't afford to build. She reached for her tote, pulling out a worn, paint-smeared sketchbook held together with tape and the stubbornness of memory. He watched with quiet interest as she flipped past pages filled with quick strokes of charcoal and faded ink. Lines formed street corners, parks, bus stops, ordinary places made softer, more human. This one, she said, turning the book so he could see, was a project I never got to finish. We called it Story Shelters. The idea was to turn city bus stops into small art alcoves panels where people could share pieces of their neighborhood history, handwritten notes, old photos, anything that reminded them they belonged somewhere. Cole leaned closer, elbows on the table, his eyes following the details, like a living archive in public space. Exactly. Something that doesn't sell, doesn't advertise, just remembers. She turned another page. And these benches. They'd have engraved messages, little snippets of people's stories. One would say, We met here on a Tuesday. Another, I waited 3 years for a letter that finally came. Small truths you might sit on without even noticing. He smiled faintly. You designed furniture with emotions attached. Not emotions, she corrected gently. Echoes. For a moment, neither spoke. The din of the restaurant faded to a hush around them, as if the sketches had built their own quiet space inside the table's small circle of light. Cole reached out, not touching the paper, but hovering a hand above it as though afraid of breaking something fragile. You ever show these to anyone, just the kids before the program closed? They'd make their own versions. One drew a bench that whispered lullabies when you sat down. Another wanted a bus shelter with mirrors that made people smile at themselves. Nora's voice softened. They believed their city could love them back. I guess I did too. He sat back slowly, his gaze sharpening, the kind of focus that hinted at gears turning somewhere behind his calm. You have no idea how close this is to something I've been fighting with. She blinked. Fighting with a project that's gone nowhere for 6 months. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, a faint weariness crossing his face. We call it the Seaport Memory Walk. It was supposed to be an interactive promenade art meets infrastructure, honoring Boston's maritime history. My team designed sleek installations, beautiful on paper, but sterile, lifeless. We've been missing exactly what you just described. Nora frowned. You mean warmth, connection, he said. A reason to stop walking? He gestured to the sketchbook. These aren't just drawings. They're blueprints for belonging. She laughed lightly, embarrassed. You make it sound grander than it is. Maybe that's the problem, he said. People like me forget that simple can be grand enough. A pause stretched between them, filled with the soft clinking of cutlery from other tables. Nora closed the sketchbook and smoothed her hand over the worn cover. It's just ideas. I'm not sure they fit your world. Cole's gaze stayed steady. They fit it better than most of the polished proposals sitting on my desk. She shook her head. I don't think you're supposed to say that out loud. I'm not supposed to say a lot of things, he said, a wry smile forming. Doesn't mean they're untrue. There was no mistaking the shift that followed. The air around them seemed to hold a low-current possibility, humming beneath conversation. Cole reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small black notebook, the kind executives carried for decisions that mattered. He opened it, flipped to a blank page, and began writing. What are you doing? Nora asked, half amused, half wary. Making a proposal. For what? For you. He tore out the page and placed it gently beside her sketchbook. On it, in precise handwriting, was a short note. Consulting concept review. Seaport Memory Walk. Initial term, 2 weeks rate. Professional standard, not symbolic. Objective evaluate potential integration of community storytelling elements. She stared at the words, then at him. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, he said. Urban Works needs this perspective. You have it. Nora's instinctive defenses flared. If this is charity, it isn't, he interrupted quietly. If it were, I wouldn't offer a contract. This isn't me buying your dinner. It's me asking for your mind. The firmness in his tone disarmed her. She searched his face for the trace of condescension she'd learned to expect from powerful men offering opportunities. There was none. Only conviction, calm and almost weary, like someone who'd finally found the missing word in a long sentence. I don't even have credentials for urban design, she said softly. You have vision for human design, he replied. We can hire credentials. We can't hire sincerity. She looked back at the sketchbook, its frayed edges suddenly precious. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to see if what you build on paper can stand on pavement. What if I fail? Then we both learn something. Her fingers brushed the note again. The paper felt heavier than it should, as though it carried more than ink, maybe the weight of a door opening. You move fast, Mr. Harrington. I've learned timing is the one currency you can't save, he said, half smiling. Besides, I have a feeling this might balance a debt I didn't know I owed. Snow still sifted against the window, the flakes now thicker, lazier. The city outside had softened into a watercolor of light. Nora leaned back, exhaling slowly. It feels strange being seen after so long. Not seen, Cole corrected gently. Recognized? The distinction landed deep, somewhere behind her ribs. She tucked the note carefully into her sketchbook and closed it with both hands, as if sealing a fragile promise. For the first time that night, she felt warmth without wine, a small pulse of belief stirring beneath the quiet ache that had carried her through so many dim evenings. Across the table, Cole lifted his glass. To sketches, he said. Nora met his gaze, then raised her own. And to unfinished things, finding a place. Their glasses touched softly, the sound as light as the snow outside. Somewhere in the distance, a horn from the harbor sounded a low, lonely call that felt, oddly, like the beginning of something. The next morning, Boston woke gray and bright all at once, the sky rinsed clean by the storm. Nora stepped off the elevator into the 23rd floor of Urban Works headquarters, her sketchbook tucked beneath one arm, her breath visible from the brisk walk through the seaport wind. The reception area opened like a greenhouse in glass and light. Sun pooled across reclaimed oak tables. A wall of living moss climbed toward the ceiling, softening the industrial lines with something almost forest-like. The air smelled faintly of cedar and lemon oil. A woman in a tailored black jumpsuit greeted her. You must be Ms. Bennett. Mr. Harrington's expecting you." Nora nodded, smoothing her coat. "Thank you." She followed down a corridor where skylights cast ribbons of winter light across the concrete floor. Each workspace looked intentional wood, metal, and color in balance. The hum of quiet conversation filled the air like low music. Cole was standing near a large model of the city, sleeves rolled to his forearms, gray threading through his hair like silver and stone. He looked up and smiled, not the polite smile of a CEO, but something warmer, more grounded. "You found us," he said. "I followed the smell of ambition," she replied dryly. He laughed. "We try to keep it ventilated." She set her sketchbook on the edge of the model table. "You said you wanted me to see the space first." "Right." He gestured toward the glass wall behind him. "This is the Seaport Project Room. That's where your work would happen with our design team. You'll have access to materials, digital modeling, and anything you need to test your ideas." Nora stepped closer to the scale model, tracing a finger above tiny wooden blocks representing the waterfront. "It's beautiful," she admitted, then added, "and intimidating. Good design should do both," Cole said. "Otherwise, it's decoration." She gave a small nod, absorbing the atmosphere. The walls held mounted photographs of finished projects, plazas, schools, community centers, each signed not by a company name, but by a line of text designed for belonging. Nora looked back at him. "You mean that?" "Every word." They walked into a smaller conference room lined with cork panels and sketches. He gestured to the long, reclaimed wood table in the center. "Let's talk about your terms." The way he said it made her pause. "You mean your terms? Nora, your boundaries, your expectations. You're not a charity case, you're a consultant. We start every partnership by clarifying those." The word partnership landed with surprising weight. She pulled out a chair and sat, the sketchbook still under her arm. "Well," she said, "I suppose we start with rate." He smiled. "We do." "I looked up standard consulting fees for design specialists in Boston," she said, unfolding a paper she'd printed that morning. "I'd like to match the lower mid-range. I don't have the credentials your staff does, but I'll bring equal effort." Cole scanned the paper, then slid it back toward her. "That's fair, but you'll take the upper mid-range. If this is worth doing, it's worth doing with respect." Her mouth twitched. "You don't negotiate down, do you?" "Only with contractors who overpromise. Then I'll try not to." "Don't try," he said quietly. "Just deliver what you see." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I also want credit. Public credit. If my ideas appear in the final proposal or the press release, I want acknowledgement by name." Cole didn't flinch. Agreed. "You said you wanted authenticity," she continued, voice gaining steadiness. "Then you understand how it feels to be erased." He leaned forward, forearms resting on the table. "I do. You have my word." She nodded, then turned the paper over. "One more thing. Yes, no photographs, no media, not of me, not of us. I'm not a story for someone else's entertainment again." His expression softened, all trace of executive authority giving way to something quieter. "Understood," he said. "Your privacy will be protected. I'll inform our communications team." Nora felt the knot in her chest loosen, almost imperceptibly. "That's all," she said. "That's enough." He stood and crossed to the side table, where a folder waited. "Here's the formal contract. I had it drafted this morning. 2-week term, renewable upon review. You'll receive your first payment up front." "Up front," she echoed, surprised. "I believe in goodwill deposits," he said, offering a small smile. "They make collaboration less fragile." She opened the folder, scanning the neat paragraphs of legal print. The language was straightforward: consultation scope, confidentiality, equal credit for intellectual contributions. Her name, Nora Bennett, appeared in full at the top, printed as if it already belonged there. For years, she'd signed forms that called her assistant, temp, volunteer. Seeing her name framed as consultant felt like stepping into new air. Cole handed her a pen. You can take it home to review if you prefer. She looked up. No. I've reviewed enough things from the outside. The pen felt solid between her fingers. Her hand didn't tremble this time. She wrote her name in slow, deliberate strokes, each letter reclaiming something she hadn't realized she'd given away. When she slid the contract back across the table, Cole studied her signature for a moment, then offered his hand. Welcome aboard, he said. His handshake was firm, brief, professional, still. She felt the quiet pulse of sincerity beneath it, not a promise of rescue, but of respect. Nora exhaled, a long breath she hadn't known she was holding. I suppose that makes it official. It does, Cole said. Your access badge will be ready by tomorrow. You'll have a desk in the east corner, best light in the building. I thought you'd want to be near the windows. She smiled. You were right. He walked her back toward the lobby. The hallway seemed brighter now. Or maybe it was just her reflection in the glass posture straighter. Shoulders lifted, the blue wool coat catching the morning light. At the elevator, Cole paused. You don't owe anyone an explanation for being here, he said quietly. Least of all the people who once tried to make you small. I know, she replied. Then, after a beat. But it's nice to hear it said. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. She stepped inside and turned to face him. You're not what I expected in a boss, she said. I'm not sure I am one, he answered. Maybe just someone who needed to hire the right voice at the right time. The doors began to close. See you Monday, she said. See you Monday, he echoed, his smile reaching his eyes. The elevator carried her down, floor by floor, until the hum of the city returned. Outside, the air was brisk and clean, sunlight glinting off the harbor like polished steel. Nora pulled her coat tighter and slipped her signed copy of the contract into the inner pocket. The paper's weight against her heart was light but certain, like proof that the world could still make room for fairness if you insisted on it. At the crosswalk, a gust of wind lifted her hair, and she laughed quietly to herself, not out of disbelief, but recognition. She had come to dinner expecting humiliation and left with a contract written in her own name. It started with a notification, one ping, then 10, then a flood. Nora was halfway through a morning meeting, reviewing sketches for a new bench prototype, when her phone began to hum like a living thing. Cole glanced up from the table where he was arranging samples of reclaimed steel. You can take that, he said. She checked the screen. The first headline hit like a slap. Blue Coat Nora, the woman who baited Boston's billionaire. Below it, a still image grainy, cruelly lit, showed her sitting alone at Amelia's, that first night. The caption read, She came for love, stayed for exposure. The blood drained from her face. What is it? Cole asked. She turned the phone so he could see. He read the headline once, then twice. His jaw tightened, a quiet line of steel forming behind the calm. Within hours, the story spread across local news sites and social media feeds. Someone had leaked the details. The blind date prank, the laughter at the bar, even her new position at Urban Works. Comment sections lit up like bonfires. She played the victim, now she's cashing in. Blue Coat Barbie strikes gold. Can't tell if I pity her or admire the hustle. Nora closed the office door and pressed her palms to her eyes. The humiliation felt almost physical, a heat crawling up her neck, a weight pressing behind her ribs. She heard a knock. Cole entered without waiting for permission, holding 2 mugs of coffee. Don't read anymore, he said. It's everywhere. I know. She forced a laugh that cracked mid-breath. Guess my coat's famous now. Cole set the cups down, his expression unreadable. It's cruelty disguised as entertainment. People think public shaming is a sport. Someone from the old office must have leaked it, she said. They knew everything about that night. He nodded slowly. Then we'll handle it. By noon. A PR specialist from Urban Works joined them in the conference room, a sharp, competent woman named Dana, with clipped sentences and the composure of someone who'd seen worse. Rule 1, Dana said, don't engage online, no statements, no posts. It'll fade faster if you stay quiet. Nora nodded mutely. Cole, Dana continued. Your name's trending too. Best to lie low until the next scandal eats it. But Cole was already shaking his head. No, silence gives the story shape it doesn't deserve. Visibility will feed it, Dana countered. Then we'll feed it grace, he said simply. Dana sighed the sigh of someone paid well enough to know when they're overruled. Then you'll need a statement, something measured. I'll write it, he said. He turned to Nora. You don't have to stand beside me for this. But I will not let your name be reduced to a punchline. She wanted to argue, to tell him not to make things worse, but the steadiness in his voice stopped her. There was no savior complex there, just conviction. The next morning, she tried to slip into work unnoticed, hood up, head down, but halfway from the bus stop to the Urban Works building, she heard the click of a camera. A man with a long lens crouched by a parked car. Hey, blue coat, give us a smile. The words hit like gravel. She turned away, her face burning. Another flash went off. A security guard hurried from the building, shooing the photographer back. You okay, Ms. Bennett? I'm fine, she said, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Inside, she found Cole waiting by the elevator, a dark overcoat on, phone in hand. It's gotten worse, he said quietly. They've called a press briefing about the Seaport project. Reporters will ask about the leak. You don't have to be there. I should be, she replied. If I hide, they win. His eyes softened. Then we'll stand together. The briefing was held in the open atrium of the Urban Works building, sunlight pouring through the glass roof, cameras clustered like metal insects. Nora stood just behind the podium, her blue coat buttoned, hair pinned back. She could feel every eye in the room flicking between her and Cole. Dana whispered, "Keep your face calm, no reaction shots." Cole stepped up to the microphone. The noise dimmed to a hum. "Good morning," he began, voice even. "We're here to discuss progress on the Seaport Memory Walk, a project about community, belonging, and the way stories shape our cities." He paused, letting the silence breathe. "Before we do, I'd like to address something unrelated but necessary." A ripple moved through the crowd. Recorders lifted. Last week, a private incident involving a friend and colleague was turned into a spectacle. You've seen the headlines. So have I. He didn't look at Nora, but she felt his words drawing a circle around her, not to contain, but to protect. "There's a name trending online," he continued, "Nora Bennett. She's being mocked for a coat, a dinner, a moment she didn't choose. What you might not know is that her ideas are now on our walls. They shape the public spaces we build. They're part of this company's vision." He looked up, scanning the room. "So, if you're looking for a headline, print that." Cameras flashed. A reporter called out, "Are you confirming a relationship with Ms. Bennett?" Cole's tone stayed even. "I'm confirming respect," which, apparently, is rarer news. Another ripple, then laughter, brief and human, broke through the tension. Nora's pulse steadied. The sting began to drain, replaced by something cleaner defiance anchored in truth. Cole finished. "This company builds structures meant to last. Dignity should be one of them." He stepped back. Applause started hesitantly, then grew not roaring, but sincere. Nora felt the weight in her chest lighten, though the world still swirled around them in light and noise. Dana leaned close, whispering, "He just rewrote the story." "I didn't ask him to," Nora murmured. "Didn't need to?" Dana replied, "That's the point." Outside the glass walls, the snow had melted into slush, reflecting the city's pale light. The photographers, the chatter, the whirlwind of public attention all still there. But it felt different now, as if the narrative had shifted 1 inch closer to fairness. After the press cleared out, Nora walked toward the elevator. Cole was waiting, his hands in his pockets, face composed. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did. You made it look like I mattered. You do," he said. "And sometimes the world just needs reminding." For a moment, the room was quiet except for the faint hum of lights overhead. Nora took a slow breath. You realize you just painted a target on your own back, right? He smiled faintly. Good thing I build with steel. The elevator doors opened, spilling light between them. Nora stepped inside, the echo of applause still faint in her ears. As the doors closed, she saw their reflections his tall, still figure, her blue coat beside him, and thought how strange it was that visibility could sometimes feel like protection instead of exposure. The workshop smelled of sawdust, cold air, and coffee gone lukewarm. It was 10:47 p.m., the kind of hour when only the most stubborn ideas were still awake. Nora stood beside a row of rough tooth-for planks balanced across sawhorses, hair tied up with a pencil, sleeves rolled past her elbows. If this thing collapses, she said, eyeing the improvised bench, I'd like someone to tell my mother I went heroically. From behind her, a voice replied. We'll say it was in service of public art. Cole was crouched at the other end, cordless drill in hand, the steady whirring sound blending with the faint hum of a space heater. He tightened the last screw and sat back, examining the structure. Not bad for two amateurs with ambition. Speak for yourself, she said. I've been assembling IKEA furniture since college. He chuckled, setting the drill aside. Around them, the rest of the design team lingered half a dozen staffers who'd volunteered to help prototype her idea after hours. Dana had brought pizza. Eli from engineering was sketching wiring diagrams on a napkin. The room felt alive in a way Nora hadn't experienced since the art room at Jefferson Elementary. On the work table lay the heart of her concept, a small metal plaque engraved with a QR code and 4 words. Every seat has a story. This one goes on the front edge, she said, picking up the plaque carefully. People can scan it with their phones, record a short message about a memory, and upload it to the community archive. That way, when someone else sits here later, they can listen. Like an open-air diary, Eli said, more like a conversation that never ends. Nora corrected. Cole nodded. It's simple, which means it has a chance to survive bureaucracy. She smirked. The ultimate design challenge. He poured coffee into 2 thermoses and handed her one. You'll need this. We're testing audio outside. The team followed them down the freight elevator to the courtyard, breath fogging in the 35-degree air. The harbor wind carried a bite sharp enough to make eyes water. But no one complained. They set the bench near the edge of the glass atrium, under the faint glow of string lights that framed the building. Okay, Nora said, rubbing her hands together. Moment of truth. Eli crouched beside the bench, tapping his tablet. Microphone active. Try recording. Cole cleared his throat, leaning forward slightly. Testing. Urban Works. Midnight Edition. The speaker crackled, then replayed his voice low. Smooth, faintly amused. Huh, he said. Not bad. Nora grinned. That's practically applause. Your turn? She sat on the cold wood, the grain biting gently through her jeans. My name's Nora Bennett, she said softly, speaking into the night. If you're hearing this, you're sitting where ideas start between old mistakes and new hopes. When the playback echoed her words, even the wind seemed to hush for a second. Dana sniffed, pretending it was from the cold. That'll sell itself, she murmured. Eli ran another test, then queued up an audio clip they'd pulled from a public recording archive, an interview with a retired longshoreman from the 1960s, his laugh deep and round. As it filled the courtyard speakers, everyone fell quiet. The sound seemed to come not from the bench, but from the air around it, rough, human, and joyful. It was the sound of the harbor remembering itself. Nora looked over at Cole. His eyes were fixed on the bench, expression unreadable. When the recording ended, he let out a breath she hadn't realized he was holding. That, he said quietly, is what this project's been missing. They carried the bench back upstairs to the prototype lab. The group gathered around it, buzzing with quiet excitement. Ideas spilled out faster than anyone could write them down. Imagine each neighborhood having its own bench, Dana said. People could map their stories across the city, or schools could partner with us. Eli added. Kids recording interviews with their grandparents. It doesn't just mark space, Cole said. It gives it continuity. Nora listened, heart thudding with something that felt dangerously close to joy. For so long, her ideas had lived inside sketchbooks and small talk. Now, they were taking shape real audible, alive. Cole turned to her. You should name it. She blinked. What? The system, the design, the story, he said. It's yours. It deserves a name. She hesitated, then smiled. Listening posts. Perfect. He nodded. And your storyboard presentation. When can you finish it? I already did. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder, its cover marked with watercolors of benches and handwritten quotes. You said to show what I see. So I did. He opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. There were painted renderings of parks and plazas dotted with listening posts, people sitting and talking, sound waves drawn like brushstrokes in the air. Each image glowed with quiet life, a celebration of ordinary voices. When he looked up, something like pride crossed his face. You realize this could redefine the whole Seaport project. Redefine or ruin it, she said lightly. Depends on who's voting. Then let's find out. By midnight, the team had finished cleaning up, the smell of sawdust and caffeine hanging in the air. Nora watched as Cole pinned her sketches onto the display wall, each one lit by a soft overhead lamp. He stood back, arms folded. We'll present this at the internal review tomorrow. The vote decides what moves to the city proposal. You don't have to risk your board approval for me, she said quietly. I'm not risking it, he replied. I'm restoring its purpose. When the others left, Nora lingered a moment longer. She walked to the bench, ran her hand along the smooth edge where the plaque gleamed, and pressed the QR code with her phone. The longshoreman's laugh played again, tinny but bright. She smiled. The next morning, the conference room was full designers, engineers, PR, and executives sitting around a long oval table. The air hummed with anticipation. Cole stood at the front, introducing the concept. This isn't about technology, he said. It's about memory made visible. Then he gestured toward Nora. The idea came from Ms. Bennett. She'll take you through it. Her throat tightened, but she stepped forward, heart steady. She spoke about belonging, about how a city could listen back. She showed the sketches, the prototype photos, the audio tests. When she finished, there was a long pause, the kind that could tip either way. Then the department head leaned forward. I think, he said, we've just found the soul of the project. Applause rose, not loud, but warm and genuine. Cole met her eyes across the room, the faintest nod passing between them, respect, recognition, and something unspoken. For the first time since that cruel night at Amelia's, Nora felt something that wasn't defense or survival. It was pride, clean and rising. Outside, morning sunlight touched the harbor like gold leaf. The model shop was almost dark, except for one lamp glowing over the seaport diorama miniature buildings. Glass towers, tiny trees frozen in perfect stillness. Outside, the city murmured, wind scraping softly against the windows. Nora stood beside the table, reviewing her latest sketches pinned to the corkboard. It was late again, the hour when thoughts stopped pretending to behave. She didn't hear Cole enter until his reflection appeared in the glass. You're still here, he said quietly. So are you. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Couldn't sleep. There's something I need to tell you. She turned, sensing the shift in his tone. That sounds ominous. It is. He walked closer, his expression stripped of its usual calm, and it should have been said long ago. She waited, hands braced against the edge of the table. The year your art program was cut, he began, voice low. My firm. This firm had just landed a contract with the city, a modular expansion for the Jefferson district. Her heart kicked once, hard. The one they said would modernize the schools. He nodded. I told myself it was progress. We built cheaper classrooms faster. What I didn't ask, what I should have asked, was who paid the price for the cost savings. The words hung between them, heavy and unadorned. Nora stared at him, the memory of that day flashing through her mind, the letter on cheap white paper. The principal's voice trembling, her students' confusion when the art room went dark for the last time. "You didn't know," she said, but her voice came out hollow. "I should have," he said simply. "That's the part that keeps me awake." Silence filled the room, not angry, but full. The hum of the heater, the distant horn of a ferry, the sound of her own breathing. "I thought I was fixing something," he went on, pacing slowly, the lamplight tracing the lines of fatigue around his eyes. Efficient, affordable words that sound good in a meeting. But efficiency without empathy is just cruelty in a nicer suit. Her throat tightened. "You can't rewrite what's done." "I'm not trying to," he said. "I just needed you to know I see it now. The thread that connects my decisions to what you lost. You shouldn't have had to carry that fallout alone." He stopped, hands in his pockets, gaze steady. "I'm sorry. Nora. Not professionally, personally." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. There was no speech, no justification, just the truth, laid bare like an open wound. She turned back to the model, tracing a fingertip over the miniature park where her listening posts would someday stand. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she asked. He shook his head. "It wasn't losing the job," she said. "It was packing up the kids' drawings. They'd taped them to every inch of that room, suns, rainbows, monsters with crooked smiles. I remember thinking, where do their stories go now?" Her eyes glistened. "I never imagined the man helping me rebuild a city's memory was the same one who helped erase theirs." He flinched slightly but didn't look away. "I deserve that." "No," she said softly. "You deserve to hear it. That's different." The air shifted, like something fragile uncoiling between them. After a long moment, she exhaled. "You know what's strange? I'm not angry anymore. Maybe I should be. But hearing you really say it out loud takes some of the poison out. I don't expect forgiveness." "I'm not offering it," she said, a faint, tired smile on her lips. "But I'm offering truth, and that's more than either of us had yesterday." He nodded, eyes glinting in the low light. "You're staying on the project." Then she hesitated. Part of me wants to walk away, to keep that line clean. But the kids who lost that room, they deserve better than a neat ending. Her hand rested over the model's park again, fingertips brushing the scale version of her listening post. If this project can give someone else a place to belong, then maybe something good grows from the mess. Cole's voice softened. "You shouldn't have to turn your pain into purpose." "Maybe not," she said, "but purpose is lighter to carry." For a while, neither spoke. The workshop seemed to breathe around them, the quiet hum of machines cooling down, the city beyond settling into night. Cole leaned against the table, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes clearer than she'd ever seen them. "When we launch this project," he said, "I want the dedication plaque to mention the students from Jefferson Elementary. Every one of them should be remembered." Nora blinked, caught between disbelief and gratitude. "You'd do that." "I already called the district office," he admitted. "I asked for the names. Some of them are in high school now." Her hand flew to her mouth. "You did that without telling me. I wasn't sure how you'd take it." She smiled through the blur in her vision. "Like this," she whispered, wiping at her eyes, "like something finally made right." He gave a small, broken laugh, the kind that comes after too long holding one's breath. "Maybe there's still time to do something that matters." "There always is," she said. "If you start with listening." For a moment, the sound of the harbor filled the space water lapping against pilings, the low hum of a passing ferry. Nora reached for her sketchbook, flipping it open to a fresh page. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "A new storyboard," she said, pencil moving quickly. "Something for the dedication mural." He leaned over her shoulder. "What's that?" She smiled. "A doorway. But it's made of voices, each kid's story layered like bricks." "That's beautiful." "It's theirs," she said. "I'm just the one holding the pencil." The clock above the window ticked past midnight. Cole exhaled slowly. "Thank you for hearing me." Nora looked up, her expression steady. "Thank you for saying it out loud." They stood there a moment longer, not as boss and consultant, not as penitent and forgiver, but as two people who finally understood the full shape of what connected them: loss, honesty, and the faint outline of repair. Outside, snow began to fall over the harbor, soft and soundless. City Hall always smelled faintly of marble dust and old decisions. Nora stood in the high-ceilinged chamber off Atlantic Avenue, her hands clasped around a folder that looked out of place among the slick laptops and leather briefcases. The winter light from the harbor spilled through tall windows, silvery and cold, painting everything in shades of pewter. Her breath fogged faintly in the draft. She could hear the shuffle of paper, the low murmur of officials finding their seats. Cole approached quietly, his coat still dusted with snow. "You don't have to speak," he said. "I can take this." "I need to," she replied, adjusting her scarf. "They need to see the person behind the drawings." He gave a slow nod, but worry flickered beneath his calm exterior. Across the chamber, the rival firm's delegation set up their glossy boards, foam core displays with perfect lighting, printed in high saturation. Their lead designer, a man named Stephen Caro, caught Nora's gaze briefly and offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They came armed," Dana muttered, flipping through her clipboard beside Nora. "Those prints must have cost a fortune." "Money's not proof," Nora said, though her voice sounded smaller than she intended. At 10 o'clock sharp, the deputy commissioner called the meeting to order. The words echoed across the marble walls, sterile and procedural. "Today's session," he began, "concerns final proposals for the Seaport Memory Walk public installation. Presentations will be made by the respective firms. Urban Works, represented by Mr. Cole Harrington, and Crescent Design Group, represented by Mr. Caro." Cole's name drew a murmur, half admiration, half expectation. Everyone knew Urban Works' reputation. No one expected them to share a table with controversy. Crescent went first. Caro rose, all polished charm, his tone rehearsed to perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "our proposal emphasizes accessibility and local engagement. We've developed what we call story benches, public seats embedded with digital access points for recorded memories." Nora's fingers tightened around her folder. On the screen behind him, images appeared, benches carved from reclaimed oak, small plaques, QR codes engraved into the metal. It was her concept, stripped, renamed, and varnished to look corporate. Cole leaned forward, jaw hard. "Parallel development," he whispered, disbelief simmering under his voice. Nora felt her pulse in her throat. Caro continued, "Our design encourages citizens to interact with the city's history directly. Each location invites them to record their experiences, preserving them for generations." When he clicked to the final slide, applause followed, muted, polite, but approving. Then the deputy commissioner turned. "Urban Works." Cole stood, his voice even. "Thank you. Before we begin, I'd like to make a small adjustment. Ms. Bennett, our consulting designer, will speak first." A ripple moved through the audience. Nora rose slowly, carrying her worn sketchbook instead of a laptop. As she stepped to the podium, her boots clicked softly against the tile, the sound oddly grounding. "Good morning," she began, voice steady though her palms trembled. "I'm not here to debate vocabulary or software. I'm here because I believe memory belongs in the open air." She opened the folder, revealing loose pages, some smudged with graphite and coffee stains. "This is where it started," she said, holding up a page of rough pencil sketches, benches, plaques, waves of handwritten notes. "These drawings were made 6 months ago. You'll notice the corners." She turned a page so the council could see the yellowed edge of a taped bus transfer stub. "Each one's from a different night. I rode home from my old job after staying late to work on these. They have time stamps: October, November, December." She passed a sheet to the clerk, who examined it closely before nodding to the panel. "These aren't renderings," she continued. "They're records of thought, imperfect, human, like the people who will sit on those benches." Cole watched her, silent pride flickering in his eyes. Someone from Crescent tried to interrupt. "We filed our design concept in February. Similarities are purely coincidental." Nora's voice cut through gently, calm but unyielding. "Parallel development doesn't usually copy the mistakes in someone's first draft." A ripple of quiet laughter broke the tension. She stepped closer to the display, pointing at one of Crescent's slides. "See this angle? That's the same misalignment I corrected in my revision notes 2 months ago. Even the texture overlay, they lifted it from an internal file I sent during the early proposal phase." Cole handed a printout to the commissioner. "Metadata logs," he said. "Our digital archives show when Ms. Bennett's drafts were created. Their files are derivatives." The deputy commissioner adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. "Ms. Bennett, are these your signatures on the original scans?" "Yes," she said. "Every page." The silence that followed was dense and electric. Caro's composure faltered for the first time. He turned toward his team, whispering furiously. Across the room, Dana caught Nora's eye and mouthed, "You've got them." Cole stood beside her again, not to speak, but to anchor. His presence was steady, like a pillar in a storm. The commissioner cleared his throat. "I believe that concludes today's presentations. The board will deliberate privately." He rose, and the audience began to stir, low conversations blending with the creak of chairs. But before he could step away, an older councilwoman at the end of the table spoke up. "I'd like to say something," she said. Her voice was gravelly but kind. "When this project began, we talked about giving this city a place to listen to itself. Ms. Bennett's presentation reminded me that listening isn't about technology, it's about honesty. And I, for one, heard it loud and clear." A faint hum of approval followed her words. Caro's shoulders sagged. Cole leaned toward Nora. "Whatever happens, that was the win." She exhaled, trembling a little now that it was over. "You think they'll choose us?" He smiled. "They already did. In their heads. The paperwork will just catch up." Outside, the winter light had softened to gold. They walked down the granite steps together, the harbor air sharp but clean. "Bus transfers and graphite," Cole said quietly. "Not exactly the armor most people bring to battle." "It's all I had," she replied. "Turns out, it was enough." They reached the edge of the plaza, where the water lapped gently against the docks. Nora stopped, looking back at the city's skyline, the cranes, the faint hum of traffic. "For the first time," she said softly, "I feel like I got my art room back." Cole tilted his head. "You mean the benches?" "No," she said. "The feeling that what I make might matter to someone who needs it." He looked at her for a long moment, the wind catching in his coat. It already does. The church bells from the north end carried faintly across the harbor, marking noon, a sound clear and steady, like a verdict. Nora turned toward it, eyes bright, her folder held close to her chest, the paper edges soft from use, the tape yellowing, the proof of her truth still warm from her hands. The office was almost silent, too silent for daylight. Computer monitors glowed like watchful eyes across the empty floor, and the only sound came from the low hum of the server rack in the corner. Cole stood by the glass wall of the conference room, sleeves rolled up, jaw set tight. The digital forensic report lay open on the table before him. Its timestamp glared like an accusation. 213A. Across from him, Nora's reflection appeared in the glass as she entered, coffee in hand, her expression wary. "You found something," she said. He nodded once. "Yes." She stepped closer, scanning the screen. "File access logs. From the Seaport server," he said. "Someone pulled the preliminary design drafts the night before Crescent's submission. They used an internal admin key one, only 3 people have." He paused, letting that sink in. "And one of them has a mortgage he's been trying to refinance for months." Nora blinked. You mean Marcus Hale, he said quietly. My project director. He's been with me for 12 years. The words fell like a dull weight. Nora remembered Marcus, the easy grin, the quick wit, the way he always kept peppermints in his pocket for late meetings. A man who once said he believed in her ideas. Cole ran a hand through his hair, pacing. The access logs, the file fingerprint, it's conclusive. He sent the drafts to a Crescent contact 2 weeks ago, disguised as a consulting review. They paid him through an LLC. Why would he? She began. Pressure, Cole said, cutting her off gently. Mortgage arrears, college tuition, an upside-down loan. He rationalized it as temporary. He turned toward the window, staring down at the city lights. I kept wondering how they got your early renderings. Now I know. It wasn't a breach, it was betrayal. The silence stretched between them, taut and thin. Nora could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, she said, You're going to confront him? Yes. Tonight? I'll stay, she offered. He shook his head. No, you've been through enough of this circus. I'm part of it now, she replied quietly. If your people see me vanish when things get hard, it'll look like I'm only here for the victories. He met her eyes, and for the first time, the tiredness behind his composure showed. All right, he said. Stay. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, summoned by a curt text. He looked confused at first, then wary, then defensive, all within the span of 3 breaths. Hey, boss, he said, forcing a smile. What's going on? Dana said you needed me right away. Cole gestured to the seat across the table. Sit down. Marcus hesitated, then obeyed. Nora stayed by the window, arms folded, silent witness. Cole slid the printout across the table. That's the server log for February 11th. File accessed at 2:13 a.m. from your credentials, then transferred to an external address registered to Norvale Consulting, a Crescent shell company. Marcus's face drained of color. Cole, come on, that's got to be a mistake. I checked it myself. Marcus swallowed hard. Look, it wasn't what you think. They reached out, offered a consulting fee just to look at the early drafts. I thought, what harm could it do? You weren't going to use that version anyway. You thought wrong, Cole said, voice flat. You compromised the work. You compromised her. Marcus's eyes darted toward Nora. I didn't mean for it to hurt anyone. God, I was drowning. Cole, the mortgage company's been hounding me for months. My wife doesn't even know how bad it got. Then you should have come to me, Cole said, each word deliberate, steady. You should have asked for help. Marcus's voice cracked. I couldn't. You've already carried half this firm on your back. I didn't want to be another weight. Cole leaned forward, elbows on the table. Instead, you sold us out for $30,000 and a clean conscience. How's that weight feel now? The silence that followed was brutal. Nora felt a strange mix of anger and pity. This was what betrayal looked like, not cinematic, not dramatic, just small, desperate choices made in the dark. Marcus finally whispered, I'll resign. You don't have to, Cole said. You're fired. Marcus blinked, stunned. You'll get your final paycheck, minus the advance you took under false pretense. After that, your access is revoked. Cole's voice softened, though it didn't lose its edge. I hope you find a way to rebuild what's left of your integrity, but not here. Marcus rose slowly, eyes wet. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Without another word, he walked out. The click of the glass door sharp in the stillness. The room exhaled when he was gone. Cole stayed seated, hands clasped. For a long moment, he didn't move. Nora crossed to the table and sat opposite him. You okay? He laughed softly, no humor in it. I used to think betrayal felt like fire. Turns out it's quieter than that. Like finding a knife in your pocket, you don't even know how long it's been there. She studied him. You did what you had to. Maybe, but I should have seen it coming. He's been off for weeks. Distracted. I chalked it up to stress. That's what makes you human, she said. He gave her a long, weary look. I can't afford to be human right now. The project can't either. Then what's next, she asked. He straightened, something new settling in his posture steel beneath the exhaustion. We start again, but not from fear, from clarity. He pushed the folder toward her. You lead the redesign. Full creative authority. No filters, no approvals. The city wants authenticity. They'll get it from you. She froze. Me, Cole, this is your project. It was until tonight. Now it's ours, and you're the one who kept its heart beating. Nora blinked, unsure whether to argue or thank him. Are you sure that's wise? I'm sure it's right, he said, and right's the only kind of wise I've got left. The words hung in the air, steady and final. Through the window, the city shimmered under a thin veil of mist. The harbor cranes glowed like sentinels, their reflections trembling on the dark water. Nora leaned back, absorbing the weight of what he'd just given her, not just responsibility, but trust rebuilt from the wreckage of another's deceit. I won't let it happen again, she said. He met her gaze, something fierce but unspoken passing between them. Neither will I. They sat in silence, two silhouettes against the glass. The faint sound of the server hummed beneath their breaths. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but somewhere beyond the skyline, the first trace of light had begun to move. The storm came in sideways. By dawn, the nor'easter had turned the harbor into a blur of white and steel. Snow drove across Atlantic Avenue, the wind howling between buildings like a freight train. The radio warned people to stay home, but Nora was already standing by the half-cleared plaza, breath ghosting in the air, wool hat pulled low, blue coat dusted with ice. She stared at the spot they had marked days before, a rectangle of frozen ground where the first listening post bench would stand. Around her, the world was gray and roaring, the kind of day sane people surrendered to. Cole's SUV pulled up beside the barricade, windshield wipers thumping against the storm. He stepped out, wrapped in a heavy parka, eyes narrowed against the wind. You're actually here. So are you. I thought you'd listen to the forecast. I did. It said the city might close the harbor walk tomorrow, which means if we don't build today. He finished for her. We lose the momentum. She nodded, snow gathering on her eyelashes. You said this was about memory. Well, memories don't wait for perfect weather. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. All right then, let's build. He opened the back of the SUV. Inside were thermoses, gloves, and the crate holding the bronze plaque, the first one. The letters gleamed faintly through the frost. If you took the number 7, you rode with my dad. It was a quote from a voice recording uploaded during their prototype tests. A retired bus driver's daughter remembering his morning route. The team had chosen it to christen the project. Within half an hour, more cars began to appear. Not official cruise volunteers. Eli from engineering arrived first, bundled in a parka 2 sizes too big. Then Dana, with a camera crew and a folding table of hot chocolate. Then came others people Nora didn't even know. A retired nurse with a cane, a baker who'd read about the project online, a bus driver on his day off. They came carrying shovels, toolkits, thermoses, stories. You folks really doing this today? The bus driver shouted over the wind. We are, Nora said, shaking his hand. You okay working in this mess? He grinned, cheeks red from the cold. Ma'am, I drove Route 7 for 20 years. This isn't a storm. It's seasoning. Laughter rippled through the group, brief but bright against the gray. They began clearing snow from the plaza, scraping until pavement showed through. The air stung, gloves stiffened, breath fogged like smoke. Nora's fingers went numb, but she kept working. Cole moved among the volunteers, coordinating quietly, making sure no one slipped, handing out heat packs. When the wind gusted hard enough to lift the plywood sheets, he steadied them with his shoulder until the bolts took hold. Why are they doing this? Dana asked, filming from under her hood. Nora looked up, hair plastered to her face. Because it matters, she said simply. Because it's theirs now, too. By noon, the storm was a full white roar. The city's social media feeds buzzed with live updates from Dana's stream. Volunteers defy nor'easter to build first listening post. Thousands watched, comments poured in. My granddad took this up to 7. This made me cry. I thought it was just another art project. Now I get it. Boston needed this today. At 1:14 p.m., the bench stood ready rough, imperfect, solid. Nora brushed snow from the top, her hands trembling more from emotion than cold. Cole opened the crate and lifted the plaque. The bronze caught what little light there was, words gleaming through the storm. "Go ahead," he said. Nora took it carefully, breath fogging over the metal. Together, they knelt at the front edge of the bench. Eli held the drill, the motor whining against the wind. One by one, they fastened the plaque in place. When the last screw turned, Nora whispered, "That's it." Someone began clapping, first the nurse, then the baker, then everyone. The sound was muffled by gloves, swallowed by snow, but real. Cole looked up at the camera streaming live. "For everyone who's ever thought their story didn't matter, this bench is for you." Dana zoomed in on the plaque, the letters sharp against the bronze. The feed stayed steady as the wind whipped past. And then, through the mic, faint but clear, came a voice an old recording Nora had cued to play through the embedded speaker. A man's voice, laughing softly. "If you took the number 7, you rode with my dad. He loved that route, said every face was part of his morning prayer." The volunteers froze, for a heartbeat. The storm seemed to pause, listening. Nora felt tears freeze against her cheeks. Cole's hand found her shoulder, grounding her. "That's your art room again," he said quietly. "Just bigger?" She smiled through the cold. "No, Cole, that's everyone's." As the sound faded, the applause started again, louder this time, raw and joyful. The city's live stream cut between shots, volunteers hugging, kids sledding nearby, the bench standing against the wind like a monument built from stubborn hope. Across social media, headlines shifted tone from scandal to symbol. The blue coat story finds its purpose. Cole's phone buzzed with messages, city officials, press, even rival firms. But he pocketed it all, eyes on the people still shoveling, still laughing through the snow. "This was never about saving face," he murmured. "What was it about?" Nora asked. He looked at her, snow melting on his lashes. "About giving the city back to itself." The wind howled again, sharp and beautiful. As twilight settled, the storm began to ease. The clouds cracked open just enough for a sliver of light to spill over the harbor, a faint amber glow reflected on the wet pavement, on the bronze plaque, on every smiling, frost-bitten face. Someone passed around paper cups of cocoa. Someone else started humming a tune that sounded almost like an old sea shanty. Cole looked around at the faces, ordinary people, flushed and shining, and felt something he hadn't in months, peace. Nora sat on the bench, pulling her gloves off just long enough to trace the letters of the plaque with her bare fingertips. "You hear that?" she said softly. He tilted his head. "What the city?" she said. "It's listening." The wind shifted again, carrying laughter, music, the clang of distant harbor bells. And for a brief, breathless moment, it felt like the storm itself had joined in, howling not in anger, but in celebration. The next morning, the storm had gone. The city glistened under a brittle blue sky, every branch sheathed in glassy ice. The harbor shimmered like a mirror, as if the night before had been a fever dream, a white roar replaced by a hush so clean it almost hurt. Nora arrived early at the seaport site, boots crunching through crusted snow. The bench they'd built stood proud amid the frost, bronze plaque catching sunlight like a coin tossed to the heavens. Around it, crews had begun laying ceramic tiles for the walkway, a slow, deliberate pattern of color guiding visitors from the street toward the water. She was kneeling by a stack of blank tiles, brush in hand, sketching the outline of a compass rose when she heard the hesitant voice behind her. Ms. Bennett. Nora turned. A woman stood at the edge of the work area, holding a cardboard box wrapped in twine. She wore a heavy wool coat, the hem still dusted with snow. Nora needed only a heartbeat to recognize her. Marjorie Laird, she said softly. The woman nodded. You remember me. How could I not? Nora set her brush down. You were head of the arts department at Jefferson. I was... Marjorie's voice wavered. And when the budget cuts came, I didn't fight for you, or for the program. The box in her arms shifted slightly. The sound of rattling paint jars came from inside. I found these, she said. In a storage closet they're finally clearing out. The old supplies from your classroom, the kids' brushes, some of the sketches, even your sign, the story room. Nora swallowed. You kept them. Marjorie's eyes glistened. I couldn't throw them away. I told myself I was saving them for something, though I didn't know what. When I saw the broadcast last night, saw you out there in the storm, I knew. She placed the box carefully at Nora's feet. Inside lay brushes hardened with age, half-empty paint tubes, and a cracked ceramic mug filled with colored pencils. On one scrap of paper, faded crayon letters spelled, Our Stories Matter. Nora touched the edge of the sign, the way someone might touch a relic. I owe you an apology, Marjorie said. More than one. Probably. You don't, Nora said automatically. But Marjorie shook her head. Yes, I do. I laughed at your ideas back then. Told you your projects were too sentimental. Truth is, I was scared. You had this way of believing art could fix things, and I'd already stopped believing that. It was easier to mock than to admit envy. Nora looked up. You were scared of becoming irrelevant, of watching the world move past me. I was trying to protect myself, not realizing I was helping to destroy something better. The confession hung between them, raw and small. The wind off the harbor carried it away like breath in winter air. Nora nodded slowly. That's a heavy thing to carry. Marjorie gave a brittle laugh. Heavier than this box, I promise. She hesitated. May I help? Just for a bit. I heard you're painting wayfinding motifs. Maybe I could add something. Nora hesitated. The instinct to say no flickered, but then she saw the tremor in the older woman's hands, the quiet hope behind her embarrassment. Sure, she said. There's room. Marjorie smiled through the wetness in her eyes. Tell me what to do. Pick a tile, Nora said, gesturing toward the stack. Anything that speaks to you. The older woman knelt stiffly, knees protesting, and chose a pale blue square. I used to tell my students blue was the color of possibility, she murmured. Then start there, Nora said, handing her a brush. For the next hour, the two women painted side by side. Nora outlined gentle arcs of compass lines, while Marjorie filled them with soft gradients of sky. The air smelled of acrylics and sea salt. Every few minutes, the clink of a brush handle or the scratch of bristles broke the silence. A small crowd gathered as the day warmed. Volunteers, passers-by, a few curious children tugging at their parents' sleeves. One boy, no older than 8, watched them work with solemn fascination. Can I try? He asked. Nora smiled. Of course. Come here. She handed him a small square tile and dabbed paint onto his brush. Just press your palm, like this. The boy pressed his hand down carefully, fingers splayed. When he lifted it, a bright print bloomed 5 uneven petals of light against the white ceramic. The adults around him clapped softly. The boy grinned, cheeks flushed from the cold. Marjorie stared at the print as if it were something holy. Her brush trembled. Then, without warning, she covered her face and began to cry. The sound wasn't loud, just a thin, broken exhale, years of guilt loosening at last. Nora reached for a tissue from her pocket, pressed it gently into her hand. No words, no apology required. Marjorie took it, nodding, unable to speak. For a long while they stayed like that, one standing, one kneeling, snow glittering on their coats. Around them, The city moved quietly, workers setting tiles, children laughing. When Marjorie finally found her voice again, it was soft as snowfall. "You kept believing," she said, "even when I didn't." Nora smiled faintly. "Someone had to—" Marjorie wiped her eyes. "Thank you for letting me paint." "It's just paint," Nora said. "But maybe it's also forgiveness." They kept working until the light began to thin, brushing on color after color until the walkway shimmered with new life. By evening, the tide had risen, curling close to the seawall. The finished tiles glowed under the lamps, blues and golds and small handprints shining through a thin film of salt. Nora stepped back, wiping her fingers on a rag. Marjorie stood beside her, tired but lighter somehow, like someone who'd finally set something down. "Do you ever think the past forgives us?" Marjorie asked quietly. Nora watched the waves touch the edge of the plaza. "I think it just waits," she said, "until we're ready to listen." A gull cried overhead, somewhere across the harbor. A church bell marked the hour. The boy who'd left his handprint came running back, his mother calling after him. He stopped by the tile, tracing it with one finger. "That's mine," he said proudly. Marjorie smiled through tears. "Yes," she whispered, "it's all yours now." And for the first time in years, the teacher who'd once told her students that art couldn't save anything watched it save her. The morning sun burned clean through the chill, washing the harbor in amber. The tide was out, the air salt bright. Workers were finishing the last fixtures along the seaport walkway, setting plaques into their final positions, polishing the railings until they caught the light like rippling water. Nora walked the site with a clipboard and gloves, checking details before the mayor's visit that weekend. It was supposed to be routine, her last quiet round before the noise returned. She passed the bench, tracing her gloved hand over the smooth grain of the reclaimed oak. The bronze plaque gleamed, the familiar line catching her eye. "If you took the number 7, you rode with my dad." That alone was enough to make her smile. But when she moved to the next section, the curved panel that framed the entry arch, she stopped. There, affixed beneath the project's official title, was a new brass plate. The engraving was simple, elegant, but unmistakable, designed by Nora Bennett. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her first thought was that it was a mistake, maybe a fabricator's assumption. She looked around for the site manager, ready to protest, but something in the deliberate neatness of the lettering stopped her. This wasn't an error. She turned at the sound of footsteps crunching behind her. Cole approached, hands in his coat pockets, a quiet smile on his face. "You saw it," he said. Her pulse jumped. "You did this." He nodded. "Guilty." "Cole." "Before you say anything," he added, "I cleared it with the city. They agreed. It's not promotional. It's provenance. Credit belongs where credit's due." Nora's throat felt dry. "You should have asked." "I thought about it," he said, stepping beside her, looking at the plaque as she did. "But then I realized if I asked, you'd say no." She stared at him. "Because I don't want this to look like a stunt. People still remember the blue coat story. If they think He interrupted gently. "Nora, this isn't about a headline. It's about history. Artists sign their work. Engineers do too. Why should you be invisible just because this project was public?" She looked away, eyes on the harbor. The light fractured across the water, scattering gold flecks like spilled memory. "I never did this for attention," she said. "I know," he replied softly. "That's why it matters that people know you did it." For a long moment they stood there, the wind lifting strands of her hair. Somewhere down the walkway, a crew hammered the final bolts into a railing. She let out a shaky breath. "It's just a name." "It's your name," Cole said. "And credit is oxygen. The right kind keeps good work alive. The wrong kind, well, we've both seen what happens when the wrong people take it." He wasn't smiling now. His voice held the faint rasp of someone who knew too well the cost of silence. She thought of the months behind them, the humiliation, the leaks, the rebuild, the storm, the small victories carved out of cold weather and fatigue. Her name had been used as a punchline once. Now it gleamed quietly on brass, not shouted, just there. She exhaled, a laugh somewhere between disbelief and surrender. You really don't let people hide, do you? Not when they've earned light, he said. You taught me that. She knelt then, gloved fingers brushing the edge of the plate. The engraving was sharp and cool to the touch. For a moment she thought about asking him to take it down, about the simplicity of anonymity, but instead she traced the letters slowly, almost reverently. When she spoke again, her voice was steady. All right, it stays. Cole tilted his head. On one condition, two, she said, smiling faintly. One, no press release. It doesn't need a story. It can just exist. And the second, she looked up at him. We add more plates, not just mine. Everyone who touched this, the welders, the students, the volunteers, even that boy who left his handprint. Let the city see all the names that built it. He nodded, slow and certain. Deal. For a long time they stood side by side, the wind carrying gull cries and the faint clang of the shipyard cranes. Around them, sunlight crawled higher across the benches, turning the plaques into tiny mirrors. Nora could see their reflections, side by side her blue coat, his gray scarf distorted but together. Feels strange, she admitted, being seen without armor. He smiled gently. That's what visibility feels like when it's honest. It's not a spotlight. It's a sunrise. She looked at him. Really looked the lines around his eyes, the silver at his temples catching the light. You're full of metaphors today. He shrugged. It's a hazard of admiration. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. When the workers packed up for lunch, the plaza fell quiet again. Nora sat on the bench, watching her name glint against the oak, each letter catching a pulse of sunlight. She remembered every version of herself that had led here: the teacher, the woman in the thrifted coat, the one who once felt invisible at a restaurant full of polished laughter. The wind moved gently across the plaza, the harbor, calm now, whispered against the stones. Cole turned to leave, but paused, watching her for a moment. You know, he said, the first time I saw you sketch, I thought this woman draws like she's breathing stories into walls. She looked up. And now, he said, I think you've done more than that. You've breathed life into a city that forgot it could feel. Nora laughed softly, almost embarrassed by the weight of his sincerity. You're impossible. Maybe, he said, but you're inevitable. She watched him walk away toward the office trailers, his figure cutting through the brightness. Then she turned back to the plaque. The metal had warmed under the sun. She pressed her palm to it, just once, as if leaving a promise there. A gust of wind carried the sound of distant church bells across the harbor. She listened, eyes half closed, the brass under her hand like a heartbeat, finally her own. The world didn't tilt or burst into applause. It simply held her quiet, steady, and seen. The harbor lights came on one by one, their reflections swaying across the dark water like candle flames in motion. The plaza was alive, bundled figures gathered close, thermoses steaming, mittens clapping. The December air was sharp but kind, the kind that made breath look like memory. Nora stood near the back of the crowd, her blue wool coat visible even in the low light, though it was more mended than ever. She could hear the murmur of people she didn't know, voices rising and falling like tidewater, a retired dock worker, a mother with her daughter on her shoulders, a small chorus of kids giggling at the microphone feedback. The benches gleamed under the floodlights, their plaques polished, names catching the glow, hers among them now, no longer hidden. Cole was already at the podium. He wore no tie, just a dark coat, and that same calm steadiness that had carried the project from chaos to completion. A breeze tugged at the pages in his hand. Good evening, he began, voice warm and sure. Thank you for braving the cold to celebrate something that began, oddly enough, with silence the kind that hurts more than noise. A ripple moved through the crowd, the kind of quiet that leaned forward to listen. He glanced toward Nora. A few years ago, I sat in a restaurant and heard people laughing at a stranger. I asked for quiet that night, just a moment of decency. What I didn't know was that the woman sitting alone would give this city something better than silence. She gave it a voice. Nora felt her breath hitch. The words weren't rehearsed. They landed like truth, clean and unadorned. Cole continued, eyes on the crowd, these benches, these plaques, these stories, they don't belong to Urban Works or to me. They belong to every person who's ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. And they belong, most of all, to the woman who reminded us that dignity doesn't ask for permission to exist. He looked toward her again, and though the cameras turned to follow his gaze, there was nothing performative in it. It was simply connection, earned through storms and work and forgiveness. Cole's next words came quieter, as if he were speaking only to her. Nora, thank you for letting me make my apology into work. The wind shifted, lifting a strand of her hair across her cheek. For a second, the crowd blurred behind her. Nora felt the sting of tears, but they were warm, not painful. She nodded, a small gesture that carried all the meaning it needed. Then came the cue. The mayor stepped forward, pressed a button on a tablet, and the sound system, subtle and hidden, came alive. A soft chime rang out, clear as glass, then another, and then, from the speakers built into the benches and plaques, voices began to weave together, not music, not performance, but snippets of real people recorded over the past weeks. My dad drove the number 7 every morning, said sunrise was the best shift. My grandmother sold flowers by the dock. Every petal smelled like salt and hope. I met my wife waiting for the 5:10 bus right here. One by one, they overlapped, faded, harmonized ordinary voices rising into something whole. The sound filled the plaza, spilled into the harbor, echoed off the steel and glass towers beyond. People stood still, hands clasped, eyes glistening. Nora moved closer to the first bench, her bench, and knelt. The bronze plaque was warm from the lights, smooth under her palm. She pressed her hand against it, just as she had months before when it was only wood and hope. The audio shifted, as if responding. A child's laughter rippled through the air, bright and startling, followed by a woman's voice saying softly, "We remember?" A few people gasped. Others smiled through tears. The crowd seemed to breathe as one. Cole stepped back from the podium, letting the moment belong to her. Nora looked up at him across the distance, not with the nervousness of that first night, not with the guardedness of someone waiting to be tested, but with something simpler, deeper recognition. The wind caught her coat, lifting its hem just slightly. For an instant, the blue wool shimmered in the floodlights, the same color as the harbor beyond, the same hue as the twilight sky. In that glow, the laughter from that long-ago restaurant felt far away, like a sound from another life. The mayor said something about civic partnership. Applause followed, but Nora barely heard it. She stayed by the bench, her hands still resting on the plaque, listening to the layers of stories moving through the air, a living choir of memory. Cole joined her quietly. He didn't speak, just stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Quite a sound," he said at last. "It's the city breathing." She answered. He nodded. "And you gave it lungs." She smiled. "We did." They stayed like that as the crowd began to drift away, the laughter and chatter folding into the wind. Somewhere behind them, a child's voice rang out again from a speaker, high, bright, timeless. "Hi, Mom, I made you a story." Nora closed her eyes. When she opened them, the last of the daylight had gone, leaving the harbor a sheet of dark glass. The benches gleamed under the lamps, each one holding a little piece of someone's life. She adjusted her scarf, started to turn toward Cole, but the wind caught her coat again, billowing gently like a flag, like a sail catching homeward air. For a heartbeat, it looked like it might lift her. And then the scene held quiet, golden, the sound of voices fading into the sea breeze. The camera would linger there, if there were one, the blue wool coat moving softly in the harbor wind. The last note of a city remembering itself. Fade to stillness. Sometimes, healing begins where we least expect it, in a moment of humiliation that turns into grace, in the hand of a stranger who chooses kindness instead of indifference. Nora's story reminds us that dignity isn't something given by others. It's something we quietly reclaim when the world looks away. What began as a cruel joke became a seed of connection, because one man decided that silence was not the same as respect, and one woman dared to turn pain into purpose. Maybe that's how change really happens. Not through grand speeches or perfect plans, but through small acts that restore our faith in each other, a glance held, an apology spoken, a name carved into brass not for fame, but for truth. And if we're lucky, we find, as Nora did, that the moments meant to break us can, in their own time, teach us how to build something beautiful instead. Thank you for being here with us, for every minute you've spent listening, for every heartbeat you've shared with this story. We're deeply grateful. Every like, every share, every subscribe isn't just a number. It's a way of keeping compassion alive in the world. It means more stories can be told, stories that heal, that remind us we're not alone, that kindness still matters. From all of us at Shining Stories, thank you for believing in the quiet power of humanity. We'll keep the light on for you.